Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando time-lapse series. In today's episode, we will continue where we left off in the last episode and build the upper half of this building. By the way, it's called the Chamber of Commerce. I think I did not mention that in the last episode. And what I found out about it was that it serves as a package service. So if you do a lot of shopping in the park and do not want to carry all this with you, you can send over it to this location. And at the end of your visit, you can go here and pick up all the things you bought. And you can exit the park then because it's right next to it. Sometimes it's quite hard to judge what specific service buildings have, especially on Main Street. Quite often they change over time and you have to search for clues and evidence on which service a specific building provided in a specific time frame. With that, of course, the question comes along, in which time period we want our recreation to set in. I would always say that we make our park the most recent version of how it exists right now in reality, because in that way we can always include the newest additions to the park, and we benefit also from POVs and images and videos of people that are in the park right now. But I also like the idea, maybe at some point, to make a version of the park shortly after it first opened. So this would be like in the 70s or 80s, or for Anaheim in the 60s. But to get back to the point, it doesn't really matter right now if it's a package service or maybe a gift shop or something like that, simply because you don't see it, because you only see the exterior. We can of course later go in and place an in-game shop in this building and rename that after its service. That's exactly how I did it in Anaheim. But I mean, this package service idea and those special services, I mean, you can't really recreate that, I think. Or at least you can't make it functioning in the game. You can only make signs and make visual clues that this service exists inside this building. At this point, let's get back to our build. So you see, I recreate this window here and I use just those wooden planks for that. And especially on those round elements, I just rotated this plank and used the short side on it to get those arches. And so if you watched the last episode, I talked about having this vision that every building you see on Main Street has an actual indoor, a simplified indoor that is illuminated. So you can actually look inside the building itself and you don't have this static facade there. So I created this black box inside and put lights in there, and at least for now I didn't really found a way to properly light that, and it doesn't really look like I imagined that, especially because you have those wooden planks on the top arch that you of course see. At least for now I don't see any other piece work there. So maybe in upcoming updates I will rethink this step, but at least for now you will see me also later here use the cloud, this cloud element that is lit. And I think this works the best here because you have a lit screen there that is illuminated at night and which looks quite okay on daylight, and where you don't have to bother about the inside. So at least for now I think this is our solution. And the only other solution I can think of are billboards. I mean, we can make our custom window background, so to say, with some drapes on it maybe. And if that thing is also lit at night, I think this will look much better then. So I think this gives us a nice transition now to the next topic, and that is the Planet Coaster roadmap, or those next updates that are still to come. They include billboards. And so they released this roadmap image where you see basically for each month that is coming now another update. So for February, update 2, for March, update 3, for April, update 4, and so on. And I'm so happy to see that, because that's exactly what we need. We need 3 updates and we need them fast. So the second update, that is dated to the 13th of February, will include custom billboards. I mean, right here it says video billboards, but I hope that they, of course, didn't forget about static billboards for pictures and images. And it will also include custom speakers, which is also great that we have our own music in the park and custom sound effects. And then they have a bunch of smaller features, I would say. I will just show this here on the left side. I mean, it sounds like many things that are coming, but still I think it's just minor things that should be already in the game. And I mean, you also have their multi-select, and it doesn't really say anything specific about it. It just says multi-select. So it could be anything here. And also the other things, they are all pretty generic, I would say. So I'm certain they will elaborate on that and give us more details. And it's the same thing with the third update. It's mainly focused on those water rides, I would say, where they wanted to have more realistic guest movement or animations in those rafts, and that you can actually make people fly out of those water rides. So this is for us pretty pointless, but it's just our issue because we don't have any water-related rides in the park. And the only other thing that I'm pretty hyped about is this scenery rotation toggle. They listed it as a feature. However, since it doesn't say anything specific here, it only says it's a toggle, I'm not really sure what it is actually. Maybe they add different custom rotational angles. I mean, this would be the greatest thing. Then I wouldn't have to use those custom rulers. But it really doesn't explain here anything. So I hope they will elaborate on that. But after all, I mean, it's just great that they have now a strategy on how they will continue and work on this game and give us as a customer of this game a roadmap and a perspective how this game will look like in a couple of months from now with added features, changes and fixes. And that's just a great thing in general to provide some transparency to the players that play your game, and that's great that they do that. So on this point, let's get back to the build. So something I did not mention in the last episode, because I did not really thought about it, because I was still ill at the time, that this building, it has a very unique architecture style. You can of course say that everything you see on Main Street is mostly in the Victorian style, but everything is flowing here also a bit. So it's not only the Victorian style that is the most prominent maybe, it consists out of many influences from other architecture styles. And at least for this building, this is the Italian and the Romantic style. So in architecture, you have something that we call the architecture order or the classical order that refers to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And with that, you can basically describe the architecture or the architectural elements from those buildings from that time. So the most prominent example of that are the column types, because there are different classical orders like the Doric order or the Ionic order or even the Corinthian order. So here on this building we have, I think, the composite or the Corinthian order. I'm not too sure about that. But those two styles, they are very similar. And so, of course, the in-game limitations of just creating something like that, you could, of course, use now the preset from the mythology pack here. But again, the scaling on that is just too big in order that it would look realistic for me. I mean, in the end, it is not really that necessary that it looks exactly like that. But it explains very well, of course, why this building looks a little bit different than the railroad station, for example. And so you have very similar styles there, but still, when it comes to those details and those ornaments, they are very different on that spot. And at least for me, when I look on this building, it looks a lot like an Italian palazzo or something that would be built in Renaissance style. And that's the thing, right? Every building you see on Main Street is not the same. Every building has a specific purpose, and that's not only the function of it, but also the visual appearance of it. And that's, of course, mainly the architecture style, but maybe also the color or the form or the layouting of that building. Oh, and by the way, very quickly, this arc that I just placed down here right now, it fitted so perfect there that I decided to go with that because I didn't really found another way, or I didn't want to search for hours now the perfect pieces for that and make my custom arc with like 100 pieces. But the only downside of that is that this arc, you see this golden trim, and I had to hide that. And therefore I had to put this arc a little bit into the back, and you get this step back there on the wall that you don't have in reality. But still, I think it's so minor that you barely see that, and in the end the result will look fine. But in general, I think this building was a little bit tricky to construct. You have many things where you have to be very cautious, otherwise this whole thing will not work. And you have on many parts those ornaments, and if they aren't in the right place, it will not match with what it should like in reality. So it took me longer than I wanted actually. But maybe that's something that I have to kinda get used to, because I mean, this building already is much more detailed than anything I would construct in Planet Coaster 1. And guess what? It's the scaling. It's the option that we have now that we can scale literally anything here. And this takes of course time, because on pretty much any piece that I place down, I have to check, do I scale it up or down, or do I leave it like that? And you have this extra step there. In the prequel you hadn't that. You just took what you had and made the best out of it. And to be quite honest, I miss it a little bit, because it was so easy and straightforward. And it also limited yourself from going into this detailism that we go now. And don't understand me wrong here, I absolutely love this ability that we have it. It's just very time consuming, I think. And it's just a natural issue that comes along with that. And therefore I thought maybe now that we have our railroad station, in the couple of the next weeks I will try to get back into Planet Coaster 1. And this does not mean that I will stop now with Planet Coaster 2. The Orlando Timelapse series will continue as usual. It's just the thing that I want to get back into Planet Coaster 1 to release those POVs of those rides that are existing and that you didn't see yet. And it's not only the POV, it's also to make a little diorama here that showcases this ride solely by itself, and that you can download and play for yourself as well. And I think at the end this will give a nice mix on this channel, that you not only have Orlando content but also Anaheim content. At some point the plan is of course to get back into Anaheim and to finish the park. But at least for this step I want to finish the main street here in Orlando. It's just the thing that I fear that we lose the focus here if we haven't the main street. When we have the main street, you can always go back and forth and say, okay, we work now on this area, then we work on this area. We have this crucial vocal point where we can always come back to, and where we can focus ourselves on a specific area. So at this point, let's come back to the build. Right here we are working on this bridge element that connects the Chamber of Commerce building with the City Hall. And I find it quite interesting that behind this bridge element you have a little atrium. So a little place where you are surrounded by all those buildings and where you can rest, and you have a little bit more a private space where you don't have so many people running around. And I like this motive a lot, because in Roman architecture you have this in houses as well. This motive that you have a atrium inside your house where the roof of that is open to the outdoors. In that scenario, it was not only visually pleasing, it was also a functional decision that when it rains, that you gather all the water inside this atrium, and this water would evaporate, and you would have a better quality of air inside those houses, because it's very hot in the summer in Italy. Right here it's maybe not so specific in their function, but you also have something similar to that, because you have a big tree standing there inside this atrium that protects you against the sun and where you can retreat and relax. And you also had that in Anaheim, exactly in that same position on the left side on the main street. And so I think it's very crucial when you are layouting or creating a park on your own, that you always think about this, in my opinion, underrated topic of protecting your guests against environmental conditions, such as the impact of the sun, or if it rains, or if it snows, or if there are hurricanes in your area. And at least here on this rather tiny courtyard that you barely notice, it's so hideous in its design that it fits perfectly with the scenery theme and the layouting of that, but it also serves as this protection against the sun and as this retreatment place. However, I noticed that this area or this atrium is also elevated. It's actually on the same elevation like the city hall. And because the city hall has steps in front of it, you also have to take some steps here to get to this elevation. And I think this underlines again the points that I made earlier, that this space is a more private space. Because I would say most people that are coming right through the park, I mean this thing is also very near to the park entrance. When you are entering the park, I think you are most hyped about the attractions, I would just assume, right? And even this height elevation makes it even more unlikely that you are going to this area by accident. So only if you are in need of having a protection against the sun, or because you just want to relax, then you can go here. And again, in architecture you have exactly the same, where you make spaces more private or more public, depending how they are layouted and are set within your location. It uplifts the quality in the end. And it's especially so crucial because when we live our lives, we experience this concept all the time. When you are home, it's your private space. When you are in your school, then you are in the semi-public space. And when you, for example, are in a park, it's a public space. So you are living all the time in some of those specific spaces. And at least in my opinion, I very much like the idea that they giving us in the park the same kinda spaces here. When you are in the main park, it's mostly public space, but in those areas here where we are building right now, it's a more semi-public space. And then when you think you are in a hotel around the park, then you are in your own little private space. I think it's important to think about that when you are creating a park on your own, maybe, to represent those three areas within your park, especially if you are going for a realistic park, because people are people. People don't want to stick only for 24 hours on your public spaces in the park. It's just not realistic. At some point they have to take a sleep, and they sleep of course only in private spaces. And so it's very interesting, this whole concept, I think, to think always about that. It may be a little bit over interpretation by me, and at certain points I exaggerate a bit, but I just try to explain things and see where it leads me. I think this is kind of the beauty of it, that you don't know where this leads to. I mean, in every episode so far that I did, I talked about many different things, and even things where I did not thought in the first place that I would talk about them. And this unpredictedness, I find it just so interesting, and it gives each episode a certain uniqueness. But in the end, I just hope that you enjoy those episodes and maybe you find them entertaining or helpful, or even you learn something on the way. And if that is so, I would be absolutely pleased with that. At this point, we are starting with the roof on this building. And the thing that was a little bit tricky here was the reason that I was limited by the smallest art piece, and that is the square that is just scaled all the way down. And so I had to work with this fixed size, and all those other art pieces have to adapt to that size. And so the plan on this roof was that I wanted to show this overhang, since it very well demonstrates this style of this architecture. And later on you can also see me even add 2 extra layers on top of that to emphasize that even more. In reality, you have on this building, on those elements, a lot more ornaments, but I just don't see a way that you can use any piece here in the game to simulate that. And to be quite frank, I think it's also not really necessary, because it's not a major building like the railroad station. It's a more secondary building, and most of the time you are very far away from that building, and then it doesn't really matter that this detail is there anyway. And so I think with this generic overhang of those art pieces, I think you very well understand what this building looks like. And at some point we have to just say, stop, okay? Too much detail here. Let's move on. So I think there is a certain sweet spot between detailism and minimalism that we have to find and figure out what works for us so that it resembles what we want to recreate without going completely ham and going into madness. For the rest of the episode, I will finish off this roof in the same fashion and overlay it with music. After it, I will conclude today's episode. So welcome back. I just wanted to say one last thing, and that's just to the roof itself, because I was quite struggling to find the right texture for it. So you only see this mythology roof texture here, which I don't really like. And so I decided to, for now at least, use just a plain art piece roof. In reality, you have like those little tiles that are diamond shaped, but I don't really think we can make that here. Maybe with upcoming updates, we get some more wall textures or roof textures, and then we could implement them then. But other than that, I would like to conclude today's episode. We talked today a lot about different architecture styles, especially for this building, and we talked about the Planet Coaster 2 roadmap and the upcoming updates that will hopefully change the future of this game to the better. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, like or comment, join our Discord server, watch my videos about Anaheim or Orlando, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.